Welcome back to the ADP, the Average Dudes podcast with your Average Dude host, Matt Mormann, and just another quick news roundup highlighting some stuff going on in the crazy world of fantasy football. It is June 22nd here, about 9:30 at night when I'm recording this. I'll probably put it out. I'll probably schedule this to go out in the morning, so hopefully nothing changes overnight that drives anybody too crazy. If there is, then hey, maybe I'll do a surprise episode in the morning. We'll see. Our three big stories here for this evening are, first things first, Tyreek Hill and his situation going on right now from down in Miami. And then we're going to talk a little Trey Lance and the 49ers situation. And then last but, probably least, Sony Michel signing with the LA Rams. So, first things first, Tyreek Hill. And disclaimer to put out here, and this is kind of a blanket statement for the podcast as a whole. When legal situations arise, it is our role here as a fantasy football podcast to talk about it from a fantasy football standpoint. When these kinds of things happen, obviously there are bigger fish to fry in this world than what this means for this fun little game that we all like to play. But that's not what you listen to this podcast for. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. I'm not here to tell you, if Tyreek Hill is a good person or a bad person for things that he has or has not done. It is simply to say, hey, here's the thing going on. Here's what it means for the game of fantasy football. And so to keep that in mind as we move forward, obviously back in the 2010s, there was a lot of very bad situations that would arise, and we would have to figure out how to handle them. And from a fantasy standpoint, it's annoying, it's frustrating, it's terrible these kind of things happen. It is a little interesting, though, on how you go about these kind of things from time to time, though, when they do come around and arise. Obviously, if you just do not want to take players that have these kind of situations, just don't take them. That's fine. But we will talk about this from a fantasy football standpoint. Tyreek Hill, the wide receiver for the Miami Dolphins, the victim in this situation, is pressing charges against Tyreek Hill. The police have concluded their investigation, and per those police reports, an argument broke out between a group of people that Tyreek Hill was with and a group of marina employees. The altercation then became physical, and an employee was slapped upon the back of the head by someone, presumed at this point to be Tyreek Hill. So, what does this mean for fantasy? Well, until we know more as far as a legal situation goes, I think it's kind of everything's on a freeze. And if you want to, I think it's a good idea to kind of make this be a tiebreaker for things, right? So, for me personally, it's not going to change my rankings at all, because I have Tyreek Hill kind of in his own tier at wide receiver 6 right now. I have kind of Jefferson and Chase, and I think Kupp is kind of that top tier too. And then you've got a Diggs and Lamb tier. And then to me, it's like Tyreek's right there with then the really fun and exciting young guys of ARSB, Garrett Wilson, T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle, all kind of right there beneath him. So to me, he's already kind of in his own tier. And so there's no one to break a tie with for Tyreek. And so for me, he just kind of stays right there where he's at. He's going to be at wide receiver 6 for me at the moment, unless we find out something more. And I do want to also point out that we have seen legal situations in the NFL take a long time before there's any kind of discipline done, right? Think of Alvin Kamara right now. There's this looming possibility of a suspension. We still don't even know if Alvin Kamara is going to have a suspension for this upcoming season for an incident that happened at the Pro Bowl last year. And that was a situation that happened at an NFL-sanctioned event, right? Like, it happened at the Pro Bowl, or I guess it was around the Pro Bowl facilities, I guess. And a full season went by, and we have not heard anything with only about 2 months to go before this upcoming season begins. So sometimes the NFL really drags their feet on these kinds of things, which, they want to make sure they get everything taken care of, make sure they have all the information correct, and then kind of make the decision, sure. So I don't know if it does anything for this season. I think Tua is the one that's maybe outside of Hill, obviously. I think Tua is the one who has the most riding on this, Because as a Tua believer, a huge part of my belief is those two weapons. It's Jalen Waddle and it's Tyreek Hill. To me, a quarterback with those two guys, it's really hard to fail. If you take one of those guys away, though, I think it becomes much easier to fail if you've only got Waddle. And so to me, Tua becomes a bit more rocky depending on how the situation goes. I've got Tua at 10 among quarterbacks. I'm leaving him there. Like I said, it's the bottom of a tier there with Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson sitting there in front of him right now at 8 and 9. I got him ahead of Anthony Richardson. I don't see that changing. Geno Smith is just barely behind him. A couple guys. Dak is one of the guys that's right there behind him for me. So for me, Tua is going to remain right there, quarterback 10, unless we get some more concrete situation moving forward. But that's kind of what's going on with Tyreek Hill right now. There's going to be this haze surrounding his situation. There's going to be those questions. And the thing with suspensions is they can kind of drop at any time. So the more we'll find out, the more we'll get an idea on it. And we will keep you updated. So next up on the Pat McAfee show, Adam Schefter appeared and said that he is confident Brock Purdy will be the starting quarterback in San Francisco. He said there was minimal trade interest from around the league in Trey Lance. There was not enough for the 49ers to want to sell low on the former third overall pick. And Schefter even went as far as to say he believes Sam Darnold is ahead of Trey Lance on the depth chart right now. Oh boy, it's not fun. It's not fun to be a Trey Lance believer right now. This hurts. Because, the Brock Purdy thing, sure. I think we all kind of expect Purdy to go into the year as a starter, assuming health. I still think Purdy's grip on that job is very loose. He has to win me over on it. I don't think he was all that impressive last season, even when he had the job. He was impressive for a 7th round pick. But I still think if you look at the overall numbers, they were not. His touchdown percentage was fantastic. He threw a lot of touchdowns. And the team won. The team got very deep. I don't love the fact that Purdy threw for, what was it? I've got it right here. In 6 games, he threw for 231 yards per game. It's not great, on only 27 attempts. So, it was the San Francisco offense. He's Jimmy Garoppolo, and that's great. I think what the 49ers wanted when they drafted Trey Lance, though, they wanted him more. And unfortunately, from inside the building, it sounds like he's not giving them more. He's giving them even less. I still hold out some hope for Trey Lance. In a Dynasty League, I think it's worthwhile to send a 2nd round pick in a Superflex League for Trey Lance. I think if you're in a very deep league, I think there's a situation where Trey Lance is worth drafting and redraft even. Again, very deep situations there. Obviously not a 10-team or a 12-team league, I don't think. No. Obviously not. But in deeper leagues, I do think there's a path to relevancy for Trey Lance. If he gets a job, we would all be super excited. If Purdy goes out there and throws 4 picks week 1, I would be sitting here and saying you should pick up Trey Lance, And this is even with these reports about Sam Darnold. Now, the Sam Darnold thing, I do think one positive come out of all of this is Christian McCaffrey. Me and Tanner sat here a couple weeks ago and talked about the 49ers a little bit, how he's a little queasy on Christian McCaffrey because of the pass catching if Trey Lance wins this job somehow. I think, look, if there are people saying Sam Darnold is better than you, I don't believe it, but I might believe that means you're not doing well yourself, right? I don't think it necessarily does mean that, Sam Darnold's just better than Trey Lance. I don't buy that. But I do buy into the fact that it could mean that Trey Lance is really struggling with the offense and they're just not happy with it. And so I think that if one of the two more pocket passing quarterbacks is in there, it's a great thing for Christian McCaffrey. So for me, it re-solidifies CMC over Eckler a little bit. Just kind of knowing the stories of that Trey Lance is actually QB3 at the moment. Because that's one big worry for me, is if Trey Lance is the quarterback, what does that do for all these weapons? What does that do for Debo and Ayuk and Kittle? Do they all kind of crunch each other in a low passing offense with now a running quarterback, So I do think that there is good news for the rest of the 49ers if Trey Lance is out of the picture. But my dear sweet boy, Trey Lance, makes me very sad. Last but not least, probably is least, Sony Michel is returning to the Los Angeles Rams on a 1-year deal. Look, this is bad news for my Zach Evans believers. I'm one of them. This is bad news for the Kyren Williams believers out there. I think this could actually be good news for Cam Akers because it probably means the Rams looked around and said, hey, we don't need to spend money on Dalvin Cook. We don't need to spend money on Zeke. We don't need to spend money on Kareem Hunt. We don't even need to spend a little bit of coin on Leonard Fournette. Let's go get Sony Michel, who probably is actually better than Leonard Fournette anyway. But I think this is a good thing for Akers. It means that the rookie Zach Evans was not impressing the way that I personally thought maybe he would be. It means Kyren Williams really doesn't seem to be anything. I don't think Sony Michel is going to just take the job from Cam Akers by any means. I don't even think it will be really too much of a split. I'm sitting here actually talking myself into Cam Akers a little bit, which is terrifying and bad because I'm not a Cam Akers guy. I am basically out on guys actually to their Achilles, and that pays off most of the time. I think every time, except for week 1 of last season with James Robinson. So that does have me a little bit worried about the Cam Akers. I think Sony Michel is actually kind of a moderately attractive handcuff option here. Back in 2021, as a member of the Rams, he had 208 carries and 845 yards. And in a 6-game stretch where he was the starter, he averaged 21.5 carries per game, 90 yards per game. He scored 3 touchdowns over that stretch, only 10 catches. He's never going to be a pass catcher, right? That's not what Sony Michel is. But I do think that could be a useful player in a handcuff, gets the opportunity to play kind of situation. And I think he's going to be dirt cheap. And I think he's that kind of a running back where it's kind of the sweet sauce, the secret sauce here of he's not going to interfere with Cam Akers at all. But if Cam Akers did go down, I think Sony Michel would be the guy. And so that's actually kind of an exciting combination to have there. You kind of look around at, maybe a Devin Singletary kind of a guy. Maybe a Tyjae Spears sort of situation. I don't think he's as high end as like a Jalen Warren or a Rashad Penny, definitely Elijah Mitchell, right? I prefer all those guys. Hank Bigsby, I prefer over him. But, maybe we bring him up all the time because he's perfect and amazing. Gus Edwards, right? Like that kind of style of if a guy goes down, you know who the next guy is. Zamir White is kind of riding that hope right now, right? And me and Tanner talked about that a few weeks ago, where I kind of prefer, to me, when I'm looking at my handcuff running backs, I like to find guys who I can say, look, if the one goes down, he's the guy, right? Whether you believe in either Damian Harris or James Cook, right? Like, if one of those two guys goes down, the other guy's the guy. Me and Tanner, I think we talk about the Jets is kind of the opposite of that, right? Where, like, if Breece Hall's not ready, it's going to be this mishmash of Abanikanda and Michael Carter, maybe even some Bam Knight hanging around, right? Whereas I prefer Cam Akers goes down, I believe Sony Michel is just going to be the guy then. And so to me, actually, that's going to make him a little interesting. I'm going to get to my handcuff running back rankings probably tomorrow and kind of get those updated. I'm kind of curious to see where I think it's going to be. I think I'm going to land with him right around probably like running back 48-ish, 45-ish, kind of in that range of guys. For reference, in my last rankings, that's where I remember I had like a Deontay Foreman, Kendre Miller, Raheem Mostert was kind of in that range because I was just not believing in any Dolphins running backs. Clyde, I think, is kind of the more that messy tier, right? Where like if Pacheco's struggling, you're still gonna have McKinnon playing, and then Clyde's gonna show up, right? I think I'd actually prefer Sony Michel over Clyde in that situation. And so, I can't believe I'm sitting here in 2023 advocating for Sony Michel, but that is what happens, when guys land in the right spots potentially. That will do it for the Average Dudes podcast, the ADP here tonight. Thank you everybody for joining me, for having a listen. Hey, be sure to go follow us on all those social medias at ADP Dudes on the Twitter. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. Be sure to follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts, and I believe it's also subscribe on Spotify. I try to make sure I'm getting all those terms correct for each of the different platforms, because hey, we're all over the place. You can find us anywhere you're listening to this podcast. You can find us anywhere you listen to any podcast. We are all over the place. We're on Apple Music. We're on all those platforms. So be sure to come on back. I will probably have another one over the weekend, I think. And if not, then everybody have a good weekend. And I will talk to you next week.